From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Estamos aguardando que os acusados
We are awaiting
mostrem
the accusers, for the accusers to show at least some piece of evidence that indicates that I committed any crime during the period that I was in the presidency.
está por detrás disso.
Now, what is behind that is the attempt to criminalize my political party.
In a Democracy Now! Exclusive, former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva for the hour. The leader President Barack Obama once called the most popular politician on earth is now running again for president of Brazil. He's the current frontrunner, but he may soon be heading to jail instead on what supporters say are trumped-up corruption charges. This comes just 2 years after Lula's close ally, Brazilian president, his successor Dilma Rousseff, was impeached in what many considered to be a coup. Is the future of democracy at stake in Brazil? We'll talk with him about his case, plus today's 15th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And he'll discuss U.S. interference in Latin America and last week's assassination of Rio de Janeiro City Council member and human rights activist Marielle Franco.
Está claro que a morte
It's clear that her death was a premeditated killing. Now, I don't know if it was a militia or a police, but what is clear is that it is unacceptable.
inaceitável.
Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, popularly known as Lula, for the hour. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a startling revelation about the 2016 U.S. election, it's been revealed that a voter profiling company named Cambridge Analytica harvested the data of more than 50 million Facebook users without their permission in efforts to sway voters to support President Donald Trump. Cambridge Analytica was founded by billionaire Robert Mercer. Trump's former advisor, Steve Bannon of Breitbart News, was one of the company's key strategists. The Facebook data was first obtained by a Cambridge University academic named Alexander Kogan, whose company, Global Science Research, built an app that paid Facebook users to take a personality test and agree to have their data collected. The app also collected the data of these users' friends, meaning it actually collected data from tens of millions of users without their knowledge. Cambridge Analytica then bought this data in order to turn a voter profiling company into a powerful psychological tool, which began launching targeted political ads aimed at carrying out Robert Mercer's far-right political agenda. This is whistleblower Christopher Wiley, who worked with Alexander Kogan to obtain the data from Facebook.
It was a grossly unethical experiment because you are playing with an entire country, the psychology of an entire country without their consent or awareness. And not only are you playing with the psychology of an entire nation, you're playing with the psychology of an entire nation in the context of the democratic process.
The London Observer, The Guardian, and the New York Times all helped break the story. The revelations of the massive data breach and its role in the 2016 election has caused widespread backlash from both U.S. and British lawmakers, who are now calling on Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg to testify. This firestorm comes after Facebook has already faced massive backlash over how the platform was used to spread Russian propaganda ahead of the election. President Trump attacked special counsel Robert Mueller for the first time by name on Twitter over the weekend. On Saturday, he wrote, quote, "The Mueller probe should never have been started in that there was no collusion and there was no crime," unquote. On Sunday, Trump tweeted, "Why does the Mueller team have 13 hardened Democrats, some big crooked Hillary supporters, and 0 Republicans?" Another Dem recently added, "Does anyone think this is fair? And yet there is no collusion," Trump tweeted. Mueller Mueller is a longtime Republican and a former FBI director who was appointed by Republican President George W. Bush. Trump's first attacks on Mueller came only one day after Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe was fired late Friday. Trump had repeatedly attacked McCabe, who was fired after Attorney General Jeff Sessions rejected an appeal that would have let him retire this weekend, meaning McCabe would have received his full pension. McCabe was fired for, quote, lack of candor about a conversation he authorized between a journalist and FBI officials. McCabe denies these allegations and says his firing is aimed at discrediting Robert Mueller's investigation in which he's a potential witness. He also says he took extensive notes about his conversations with President Trump. A slew of Democratic lawmakers have offered to hire McCabe for 2 days in order to allow him to be eligible to receive his full pension. He was fired 48 hours before he was to actually retire and be able to get that full pension. In Syria, Turkish soldiers and Turkish-backed Syrian fighters seized control of the Syrian Kurdish city of Afrin Sunday after a 2-month Turkish assault on Afrin. The takeover expands Turkey's territorial control in northern Syria and deals a blow to Kurdish efforts to achieve autonomy. Activists say hundreds of civilians have been killed in the offensive, which has also forced thousands to flee. On Sunday, dozens of Kurdish and leftist groups in Turkey demanded the international community pressure Turkey to withdraw from Afrin. This is Turkish lawmaker Berdan Öztürk.
We call on the United Nations, the European Council, the European Parliament, international coalition forces, Islamic countries, and the international community as a whole to take steps to immediately avert the tragedy in Afrin and get concrete results, including withdrawal of all armed forces who entered Afrin.
In more news from Syria, war monitors report at least 30 people were killed on Saturday amidst the ongoing Syrian government's bombing and ground offensive against eastern Ghouta outside the capital, Damascus. Thousands of civilians have been fleeing the assault on the suburb, which was controlled by rebel groups. On Sunday, Syrian state TV broadcast video of Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad visiting troops on the front lines in eastern Ghouta. In Russia, President Vladimir Putin has won another 6-year term. Official results show Putin won 76% of the vote. His main challenger, opposition leader Alexei Navalny, was barred from running. After the results were announced, Putin was questioned by reporters about whether he'd run again 6 years from now.
I believe that what you're saying is a little funny. Let's count. Will I be sitting here in power until I'm 100 years old? No, no.
Officials from North Korea, South Korea, and the United States are slated to meet in Finland this week to talk about reducing the threat of nuclear war. It's not yet announced who will be attending the meeting, but Finnish officials say the U.S. representatives are non-government officials. In Afghanistan, at least 8 civilians were killed before dawn Saturday morning when elite members of the U.S.-backed Afghan intelligence agency opened fire from a helicopter on farmers irrigating the fields below. One of the victims' brothers says they were killed still holding their shovels. The youngest victim was 14 years old. One local politician told the New York Times these types of raids are usually carried out with the assistance of U.S.-led NATO coalition. In Kashmir, at least 5 members of the same family were killed Sunday as India and Pakistan both fired across the line of control that divides this disputed territory. The victims were a couple and their 3 children who were gathering for breakfast when a mortar shell hit their home. The youngest victim was 8 years old. Meanwhile, a Kashmiri photojournalist named Kamran Yusuf has been released after being jailed for 6 months on charges of waging war against India. He was the first Kashmiri journalist to be arrested and held by India's National Investigation Agency, which was formed in 2009 to fight terrorism. In Texas, 2 people were injured Sunday night when a package exploded in southwest Austin. It's the 4th package explosion in Austin this month. The explosions have killed 2 members of prominent African-American families and seriously injured a 3rd Latino woman. Authorities say the bombings may be hate crimes and that Sunday's explosion is likely linked to the first 3. In Texas, a 23-year-old Salvadoran asylum seeker named Laura Monterosa has been released from the T. Don Hutto detention facility after a national campaign to win her freedom. Monterosa says she was sexually assaulted by a guard while in detention and was then placed in solitary confinement in retaliation for speaking up. She fled El Salvador to escape sexual persecution as a lesbian and has been detained for 9 months. And computer hacker Adrian Lamo has died at the age of 37. He's best known for hacking the computer networks of major corporations, including the New York Times, Yahoo, and Microsoft, and for reporting U.S. Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning to authorities after the two became friends online. Lamo's body was discovered in an apartment on Wednesday in Wichita, Kansas, the cause of his death unknown. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Brazilians continue to mourn the loss of 38-year-old Rio de Janeiro City Council member and human rights activist Marielle Franco. Franco was assassinated along with her driver last Wednesday night after a pair of gunmen riddled her car with bullets as she returned from an event on the topic of empowering black women. Franco, who is a black lesbian, was known for her fierce criticism of police killings in Brazil's impoverished favela neighborhoods. The night before her death, Franco wrote on Twitter, "How many more must die for this war to end?" In January alone, government figures show police killed 154 people in Rio State. Franco's death comes at a pivotal moment for Brazil and the future of democracy in South America's largest country. Just last month, President Michel Temer ordered Brazil's military to assume control of police duties in Rio. 2 years ago, Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff of the Workers' Party was impeached by the Brazilian Senate in a move she denounced as a coup. Brazil is holding elections later this year. The front-runner is Rousseff's ally, former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, commonly known as Lula. While he's leading all opinion polls, he's facing a possible prison sentence after being convicted on what many believe to be trumped-up charges of corruption and money laundering. Last year, President Rousseff said, quote, "The first chapter of the coup was my impeachment, but there's a second chapter, and that is stopping President Lula from becoming a candidate for next year's elections," Rousseff said. British human rights attorney Geoffrey Robertson told The New Internationalist that, quote, "Extraordinarily aggressive measures are being taken to put Lula in jail, quote, by the judiciary, by the media, by the great sinews of wealth and power in Brazil," unquote. Lula is a former union leader who served as president of Brazil from 2003 to 2010. During that time, he helped lift tens of millions of Brazilians out of poverty. President Barack Obama once called him the most popular politician on earth. Well, late Friday, I had a chance to speak with Lula. He was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I began by asking him about the assassination of Rio City Councilwoman Marielle Franco.
Amy, nós temos dois problemas no
Amy, we have two problems in Brazil.
aceitável
The first
o assassinato da Marielle.
is that her assassination is unacceptable, the assassination of Marielle, a young woman.
A única coisa que ela fazia
The only thing that she did was to work against the assassinations of black persons in the peripheral areas in the defense of human rights, in the defense of the lives of people.
está claro que a morte dela
It's clear that her death was a premeditated killing.
milícia ou se foi polícia.
Now, I don't know if it was a militia or a police, but what is clear is that it is unacceptable and that all of us Brazilians should come together in a single voice and shout out loud to immediately demand
Dos responsáveis dessa chacina.
punishment of those responsible for that killing. And President Temer should have learned a great lesson with this killing,
O problema da violência na
which is that the problem of violence in the peripheral areas of our Brazil is not going to be resolved by turning to the armed forces. It is necessary that the state have a presence in the peripheral neighborhoods of Brazil with jobs, education, healthcare, cultural activities,
com emprego e com salário para que
employment, and salary so that people can survive and live with dignity.
as Forças Armadas não foram preparadas para
The armed forces were not trained to deal with common crime in the favelas in Brazil.
elas foram preparadas para defender o nosso país.
They were trained to defend our country from outside
Ou
enemies.
seja, quando as pessoas entenderem
In other words, when people understand that violence in Brazil is associated with the very poor quality of life that people are subjected to,
condições de vida para as pessoas
and the lack of proper living conditions for people living in peripheral areas, then there will be less violence in the peripheral areas, especially against children, young people, and black people in our country.
da Marielle,
The case of Marielle
o da Marielle é caso emblemático porque
is an emblematic case because it requires all democratic-minded persons in the world, all those who love life, all those who love freedom,
luta em defesa dos direitos humanos.
and all of those who struggle for human rights, all should protest loudly so that the assassins of Marielle are put in prison and are given exemplary punishment. That's what we all want.
Cecilia Oliveira of The Intercept on Twitter tweeted, "The lot of 9mm ammo used in the execution of Marielle Franco and Anderson Pedro was purchased by the federal police and matches casings found at the scene of the Osasco massacre that killed 19 in Sao Paulo in 2015. 2 cops and 1 municipal guard were convicted." Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept then tweeted, "To the surprise of absolutely nobody, the preliminary evidence is establishing links between the police and the assassins who killed Marielle Franco. Nothing is conclusive yet at all in this regard, but the preliminary evidence is pointing straight in that direction." Do you agree with this, President Lula? And what do you think needs to be done immediately right now as thousands of people have taken to the streets?
Olha, a primeira coisa é que se for verdade,
Look, the first thing is, if it is true
a Marielle,
that the weapon that killed Marielle
a Polícia Federal,
was a weapon purchased by the federal police
para outra
and
chacina,
that was already
Paula, 2 anos atrás,
used in another massacre here in Sao Paulo 2 years ago, then we would have a very strong indication.
se em algum momento nesse período
We must know whether at some point in time during that period between the massacre in Sao Paulo and the killing of Marielle,
federal anunciou
whether the federal police
sido roubado armas da
denounced that any weapons had been, or munitions had been stolen from the federal police.
porque se não houve roubo e a munição
Or if there was a robbery and the munitions or weapons were purchased by the federal police, it's necessary that the federal police explain to Brazilian society why is it that those weapons were in the hands of the assassins.
federal e saber o que aconteceu.
So if there needs to be clarification with this evidence, if the weapons were stolen and they did not denounce it because they were ashamed that weapons had been stolen from the federal police, well, in this case, Amy, it's
Algum cuidado para não
very important that people be careful to make sure they're not making untrue accusations or accusations looking for a headline. Now, what is true is that for the police, for the armed forces, for the government, for the police intelligence,
tempo possível
it should be able to, in the shortest time possible, they should figure out who the assassins were and then punish those assassins.
Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He's now running again for president and is the current frontrunner, but may soon be heading to jail. We'll continue our interview with Lula in a minute and ask him about the charges against him, which his supporters say are politically motivated, and also talk with him about U.S. intervention in Latin America, about this 15th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, and much more. Stay with us.
Meu choro não é nada além de carnaval. É lágrima de samba na ponta dos pés. A multidão avança como um vendaval. Me joga na avenida que eu não sei qual é. Pirata e super-homem cantam o calor. Um peixe amarelo beija minha mão. As asas de um anjo soltas pelo chão. Na chuva de confetes deixo a minha dor.
The Woman at the End of the World by the Brazilian singer Elza Soares. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report, as we continue our exclusive, a conversation with Brazil's former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, popularly known as Lula. The highly popular former union leader is running for president in this year's election, but is facing a possible prison term on what many believe to be trumped-up corruption charges tied to a sprawling probe known as Operation Car Wash. Lula was convicted of accepting a beachside apartment from an engineering firm vying for contracts at the state oil company Petrobras, but many of Lula's supporters say the conviction was politically motivated. The Intercept recently reported, quote, "The indictment against Lula is rife with problems. The apartment's title was never transferred to Lula or his associates. He and his wife never used the property. The prosecution could not identify an explicit quid pro quo or benefit related to Petrobras. No official or internal documentation linking Lula to the apartment was produced, and the case rests almost entirely on the testimony of the executive who hoped to gain sentencing leniency for his cooperation," unquote. During the interview on Friday, President Lula responded to the charges and conviction against him.
Eu não fui denunciado por corrupção.
I was not accused of corruption. I was accused because of a lie.
Uma mentira do inquérito policial.
In a police investigation,
Do Ministério Público.
a lie in an indictment by the Office of the Attorney General, and in the judgment of Judge Moro.
Porque só tem uma prova em todo esse processo que
Because
é a prova
there's
da minha inocência.
Only one evidence of my innocence in this entire trial,
Que os meus advogados de defesa fizeram de forma magistral.
which my defense counsel explained in a magisterial manner. We are awaiting
Mostrem
the accusers, for the accusers to show at least some piece of evidence that indicates that I committed any crime during the period that I was in the presidency.
está por detrás disso.
Now, what is behind that
Criminalização do meu
is the
partido.
attempt to criminalize my political party. What is behind that
É a vontade
is the
de uma
interest
parte da elite política do
in a
Brasil,
part of the political elite of
junto com
Brazil,
uma parte da imprensa,
together with a part of the
reforçada pelo
press,
papel do poder judiciário,
reinforced by the role of the judiciary in preventing Lula from becoming a candidate in the 2018 elections.
E eu continuo desafiando a Polícia Federal,
And I continue
desafiando o Ministério Público,
challenging the federal police, the Office of the Attorney General.
Juiz Moro,
I continue challenging Judge Moro
Tribunal da Segunda Instância,
and the appellate court
mostrar ao mundo e ao Brasil
to show the world and to show Brazil
de crime
a
cometido por mim.
single piece of evidence of a crime committed by me.
Porque o comportamento do Poder Judiciário nesse instante
The behavior of the judiciary in this instance is a political form of behavior.
Mr. President, last year, the ousted president, Dilma Rousseff, said the first chapter of the coup was my impeachment, but there's a second chapter, and that's stopping President Lula from becoming a candidate for next year's elections. Do you see it the same way, that this is the final chapter of the coup? if your conviction is upheld, that you will be prevented from running in the October elections?
Amy, o PT, ele conseguiu fazer em 12
Amy,
anos de
the
governo no
Workers'
Brasil,
Party, in 12 years in the government, at the helm of the government in
muitas
Brazil,
coisas que não tinha sido feito
was
durante
able
todo
to
o
do
século XX.
many things that had never been done at any time in the 20th century.
Neste país, em 12 anos, nós elevamos 40 milhões de pessoas
This
ao padrão
country,
de vida de
in
classe média.
12 years, we brought 40 million people into the middle class.
Nós tiramos 36 milhões de pessoas da miséria.
We drew 36 million people out of poverty.
Enquanto a Europa desempregava 62 milhões de postos de trabalho, a
While
partir de 2008,
Europe
nós
was
criamos
shedding
20
62
milhões
million
de
jobs
empregos formais nesse país.
as of 2008, we created 20 million jobs in the formal sector in this country. For 12 years,
Trabalhadores brasileiros tiveram
all-
aumento acima da inflação.
Brazilian workers were able to overcome inflation.
Foi o maior momento de crescimento econômico da história do Brasil.
It was the time of the greatest economic
Foi o maior
growth in the
crescimento
history
de
of
distribuição
Brazil.
de renda na história do Brasil.
It was the
Só pra você
most
ter uma
distribution of
ideia,
income
em 12
in the
anos,
history of Brazil. To give you an
nós
idea,
bancarizamos
in
70
12
milhões
years,
de brasileiros que jamais tinham entrado num banco.
70 million people began to use the banking system who had never walked into a bank.
Ao depor a Dilma, eles não iam querer que o Lula votasse, porque eles sabem que
when
a
they got rid
relação
of
do Lula
Dilma,
com a sociedade brasileira
They did
é a
want
relação mais forte
Lula
de um
to
presidente.
come back because they know that the relationship between the Brazilian people and President Lula was the strongest relationship that the people of Brazil had ever had with a president in the entire history of the country.
E mais importante, eles sabem,
And even more important,
tenho a certeza absoluta
they know, I am
de que
absolutely
a melhor
certain
forma de recuperar a
that
economia
the
brasileira
best way to ensure
é elevar
economic
a ascensão
recovery
do povo pobre e trabalhador desse país.
in Brazil is to lift up the working people
Que eu
of this
sei como
country.
fazer isso.
They know that I know how to do
Quando o
that.
povo pobre estiver trabalhando,
Now
hora
that
que
the
ele estiver recebendo salário,
poor
hora que ele
people
estiver estudando,
had
hora que ele
jobs,
estiver comendo melhor,
had a
hora que ele
salary,
estiver
were
morando
studying,
melhor,
were
hora que
eating
ele
better,
estiver
were
vestindo
living,
melhor,
had better
a economia
housing.
volta a crescer.
When that
Nós
happens,
voltamos a ser o
the
país mais
economy
otimista
grows
do mundo
again,
e
and
o
we
povo mais alegre do
can
mundo.
become the most optimistic country in the world and the happiest people in the world.
Por isso, Amy, eu quero ser candidato a
And,
presidente da República
Amy,
do Brasil.
that is why I want to be candidate for the presidency of Brazil,
Torneiro mecânico.
to show
Para provar que torneiro mecânico
that
que não tem diploma
a
universitário
mechanic
sabe
who
cuidar
doesn't
do
have a
povo
university
brasileiro mais
degree
do que a elite brasileira.
knows better how to take care of the Brazilian people than the Brazilian elite, who never looked after the welfare of the Brazilian people.
President Lula, why did you decide to run for president again?
Olha, na verdade, eu não me decidi ainda, Amy. Quem
The
tá
truth is, I
decidindo é o
have still
povo
not
brasileiro.
decided, Amy. The ones who are deciding are the Brazilian people.
Veja, todas as pesquisas de opinião
Look,
pública que
all
são
of
feitas no
the
Brasil,
public opinion polls in
todo
Brazil,
mês, e são muitas pesquisas,
month after month, and
eu
there are several of
apareço em
them,
primeiro lugar
in
em
all of
todas as
them,
pesquisas.
I'm in first
Eu
place.
começo a ser o candidato que tem o
And
menos
so
rejeição.
I'm beginning to be the candidate who has the lowest negatives and the possibility of becoming a candidate and winning on the first round. And this is making my adversaries very uncomfortable.
Eu tenho
And
certeza, Amy, que na Suprema Corte,
I'm
no
sure,
Tribunal de Justiça,
Amy, that
eu
at the
vou
Supreme
conseguir ser
Court,
inocentado
I
e conseguir ser candidato
will be
a presidente da
acquitted
República,
and that
ganhar
I will
as
be
eleições e fazer o Brasil
candidate.
voltar a ser protagonista em política internacional, fazer a
And
economia crescer,
Brazil could once again be a
fazer gerar
protagonist in
empregos e
international
melhorar a vida
policy.
do
The
povo.
economy could grow again, create jobs, and improve the quality of life of the people. This is something I know how to do very well.
If the case does not go well for you in the Supreme Court, would you consider stepping aside?
Primeiro, Amy, eu sou muito otimista.
First of all, Amy, I'm very
Se
optimistic.
acontecer
very optimistic. Now, if
eu não poder ser candidato,
that were to happen and I was not able to be a candidate, if my name is not on the ballot,
tem que estar o nome e a fotografia na cédula eletrônica aqui no Brasil. Portanto, eu acho que, se for o caso, o partido irá convocar uma
think
convenção
that
e
the
irá
party
discutir
would
o que
call
vai fazer.
a convention and discuss what to do.
Eu vou brigar até o fim, vou brigar acreditando que se fará justiça nesse país.
I am going
Eu defendo que o juiz,
to require
que o
that
juiz Moro,
and call for justice to be done in the
se
country.
for provado a minha inocência,
Now, if
deveria
my
ser exonerado do cargo, porque
innocence
pode ter um juiz
is
mentindo
proven,
numa
then
sentença,
Judge Moro should be removed from his position, because you can't have a judge who is lying in the judgment and pronouncing as guilty someone who he knows is innocent. He knows that it's not my apartment. He knows that I didn't buy it. He knows that I didn't pay anything. He knows that I never went there. He knows that I don't have money from Petrobras. The thing is that because he subordinated himself to the media, I said in the first hearing with him, you are not in a position to acquit me because the lies have gone too far. And the disgrace is that the one who tells the first lie continues lying and lying and lying to justify the first lie. And I'm going to prove that he has been lying.
Well, you raised two issues, President Lula, the media as prosecutor and the judge as prosecutor. Can you talk about both? Start with the media.
Não, deixa, Amy, é importante que se venha ao Brasil.
Well, Amy, it's important that you come to Brazil to see what's happening with the Brazilian press.
Eu fui presidente 8 anos.
I was president for 8 years.
Presidente 4 anos.
Dilma was president for 4
E a
years.
imprensa, durante 12 anos,
And for 12
não
years,
fez outra coisa a não ser tentar destruir
all the
a
press
imagem,
did was
tanto
to
minha
try
quanto
to
da Dilma,
destroy
e a
my
imagem do
image
meu
and her
partido.
image and the image of my party.
Eu tenho mais matérias negativas contra mim.
I have
O jornal da televisão no Brasil.
more negative subject matter about me in the leading television news program of Brazil than all of the presidents in the whole history of Brazil.
É uma tentativa diária de
In
me
other words,
massacrar,
it's a
de
daily
contar
attempt to massacre me,
inverdades contra o
to
Lula,
tell
contra a família
untruths
Lula.
about Lula, about
E eu,
Lula's
a
family.
única arma que tenho
And the only
é
weapon that I
enfrentá-los. E
have
eles ficam,
is to
eles
confront
ficam
them.
irritados porque depois de me
And
massacrar
they're
durante
irritated
4
because
anos,
after they massacred me for 4
qualquer
years,
pesquisa de opinião pública
Any
feita por qualquer instituto
opinion
de
poll
pesquisa,
by any
Lula ganha as eleições no
polling
Brasil.
institute showed that Lula was going to win the elections in Brazil.
Segundo, o Ministério Público da Lava Jato. Eu
Now,
respeito muito a
second, the
instituição
Office of the
Ministério
Attorney General and the car wash scandal. I respect very
Fui
much
deputado
the institution.
constituinte e ajudei a reforçar o papel do Ministério Público.
I was a member of the Constitutional Assembly and I helped to strengthen the role of the Office of the Attorney General,
Uma
but it
força-tarefa
created a task force
organizada por promotor que foi para
organized
televisão
by a prosecutor
mostrar PowerPoint.
went to
dizendo
television
que o PT
to show a PowerPoint
foi criado para ser uma organização
and
criminosa.
said that the PT, the Workers' Party, was established to be a criminal organization, that the fact that Lula was the most important person in the PT meant that he was the head of a criminal organization.
Ao terminar a acusação,
And on
ele disse
concluding the
simplesmente o
indictment,
seguinte:
he simply said the following:
não me peçam provas. Não me peçam provas.
I
Eu
don't
tenho
have
convicção.
evidence. I don't have evidence, I have conviction.
Eu não quero ser julgado pela convicção do promotor. Ele guarde para ele as suas convicções.
I don't want to be judged by the conviction of the prosecutor. He can keep his convictions to himself. I want whoever is prosecuting me
E apresente ao
to come
povo
forward
brasileiro
in the
o
proceeding
crime que eu cometi.
and to tell the people of Brazil what crime I committed.
que eu agora estou querendo de verdade
Only thing, Amy, that I really
o
want now
mérito do meu processo seja
is
julgado.
for
Eu
the
quero que ele discuta o
merits
mérito.
of my trial to be judged. I want him to discuss it. I want him to read the prosecutorial brief and the defense brief and then make a decision.
Eu, na verdade, o que eu quero nesse momento
What I
é
really
que se
want
faça justiça nesse país.
at this time is that justice be done in this country.
The candidate polling second in Brazil's elections is a far right-wing congressman and former soldier named Jair Bolsonaro. He's been called the Brazilian Trump. Can you talk about who he is, what he represents, and if you understand there's any communication between him and the U.S. government right now?
Eu não posso fazer acusações contra adversário.
I cannot level accusations against an adversary. The only thing that I would like
Ter o direito de concorrer às eleições aqui no Brasil.
is to have the right to run in the elections here in Brazil, to win the elections,
O direito do povo brasileiro viver
and
bem.
to recover the right of the Brazilian people to live well. I cannot pass judgment on the President of the United States, just as I cannot pass judgment on the President of Uruguay, and much less can I pass judgment on my adversaries.
But if you can explain what he represents, how you differ from him.
Não, ele é deputado federal, Amy.
He is a member of the federal Congress. He was a captain in the Brazilian army. The information that we have is that he was expelled from the Brazilian army.
Comportamento de extrema direita.
And his behavior is far right-wing, fascist. He is very much prejudiced against women, against blacks, against indigenous persons, against human rights. He believes that everything can be resolved with violence. So I don't think he has a future in Brazilian politics. He has the right to run. He speaks. He projects a certain image that to please a part of the society that is of the extreme right. But I don't believe that the Brazilian people have an interest in electing someone with his sort of behavior to serve as president of the Republic.
Do you think he was happy with Marielle's death?
Eu acho porque ele prega violência todo dia.
I think so, because he's preaching violence every day. He preaches violence.
Que quem defende os direitos humanos
He believes that those who defend human rights
prestando desserviço à democracia.
are doing a disservice to democracy.
Está prestando serviço à democracia.
He thinks that those who defend women's rights are doing a disservice to democracy. Likewise, those who defend the rights of the black community. He is against everything
Quando se discuta a questão de direitos humanos.
That is discussed when one is talking about human rights.
We continue with Brazilian presidential candidate, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, in 30 seconds.
Desesperar jamais. Aprendemos muito nesses anos. Afinal de contas, não tem cabimento entregar o jogo no primeiro tempo. Nada de
Never Despair by Brazilian singer Ivan Lins. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. It was a return to our conversation with the former Brazilian president, the current presidential candidate, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Mr. President, I want to ask you about what's happened in Honduras with the Organization of American States saying that the election there of the incumbent President Hernandez was deeply flawed, with the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, going to Honduras. Clearly, the ambassador there, the U.S. representative there, deeply involved in what has taken place with the swearing in of the president before a correction of the elections. Your thoughts on what's happened in Honduras, the U.S. involvement there, and also the U.S. attitude towards, the U.S. actions towards Venezuela. putting certain Venezuelan leaders on a list of those banned from entering the United States and taking other punitive measures against Maduro, President Maduro.
Amy, é bastante visível
Amy,
a
it's
interferência norte-americana
quite visible
nos
that
países da América Central.
the United States is interfering in the countries of Central America. It's not just today that there's U.S. interference. In many countries of Central America, the U.S. ambassador behaves as though they were elected by the far right in the countries of our dear Central America. What I deeply regret is that the United States has not learned to live democratically with the countries of Central America and with the countries of Latin America.
Em janeiro de 2003,
in January of 2003, I had been president of the Republic for less than 1 month, and there was already a conflict underway between the United States and Venezuela. And I was in Ecuador, participating in the inauguration of the president of Ecuador when I met with Chavez. And I proposed the creation of a group of friends of Venezuela so as to be able to guarantee democracy in Venezuela. I told the United States that they should participate in the group. Colin Powell participated in the group, and I also got Spain involved, and Aznar participated in the group. Why? Because Spain had been the first country to recognize the coup, and the United States was accused of being involved in the coup.
E coloquei o Brasil, coloquei a Argentina para participar do lado da América do Sul e eu acho que
Brazil
mais da
and
França.
Argentina there, and I think France as well.
E nós encontramos jeito de fazer com que a Venezuela tivesse tempo de paz e tivesse
And we were
eleição.
able to
Eu
give
agora acho
Venezuela
que tem que
a
acontecer
time
o
of peace,
mesmo.
be able to hold elections.
A autodeterminação
Something
dos
like that
povos
should
é uma
happen
coisa
today.
sagrada.
Self-determination of the peoples is a sacred matter.
É direito dos Estados Unidos tomarem a decisão que bem entender a respeito dos Estados Unidos.
Right of the United States.
Isso chama-se
The
soberania.
United States has right to decide matters pertaining to the United States. That is called sovereignty. And it is up to Venezuela to make the decision within the sovereignty of Venezuela.
Fazer com que o presidente Bush se reunisse com o presidente Chávez.
I several times did what I could to get President Bush to meet with President Chavez.
Na primeira reunião que o presidente Obama foi a Trinidad e Tobago, logo no primeiro ano da posse dele.
When President Obama was recently in power, he went to Trinidad and Tobago, and then we had a meeting with him and with Chavez, trying to create the conditions for the United States to have a more peaceful relationship with Venezuela. But it seems to me that it's not possible. There's a certain irrationality at the U.S. State Department that doesn't want to negotiate peace in Venezuela.
Preciso compreender que a América do Sul crescendo vai melhorar.
But we need to understand that if Central America grows, it's going to improve the economic situation generally.
Risco em qualquer lugar do mundo. Por isso eu lamento.
No one wants to see democracy at risk anywhere in the world, and that is why I regret that there's not understanding on the part of the United States with respect to Venezuela.
The U.S. CIA, U.S. government, is well known to have been involved in the 1964 coup in Brazil. Do you see any evidence of that, both in the ouster of President Dilma Rousseff and also your own case? Do you see any evidence of foreign involvement, particularly the U.S.?
Olha, levou quase 40 anos para ficar provado que...
Well, it took almost 40 years to prove that the United States indeed did participate in the 1964 coup.
Embora não seja defensor da teoria da conspiração,
Now, even though I am not a defender of conspiracy theories, I am convinced,
a gente nos Estados Unidos que não aceita o
and
protagonismo do Brasil
people
na
in the
política
United
externa.
States, some don't accept Brazil playing such a proactive role in foreign policy.
Há interesses extraordinários na nossa Petrobras.
There are extraordinary interests in our Petrobras,
Efetivamente na influência do
and
Brasil na América
there
Latina e
is
na América do
interest
Sul.
in Brazil's influence in Latin America and in South America.
Há interesses que não dê certo, sabe, o funcionamento dos BRICS e a criação
are
do
interests
Banco dos BRICS.
That not wanting to necessarily see the bank of the BRICS countries go forward.
Todo santo dia, a relação do Ministério Público brasileiro e do juiz Moro com o
And
Ministério Público americano.
There is the Brazilian press always talks about the close relationship between the Office of Attorney General in Brazil and the Department of Justice in the United States around Petrobras issues.
Nós estamos tentando investigar.
And we are trying
Deputados brasileiros vão ao
to
Congresso
investigate.
Nacional americano, conversar com o
Brazilian
Congresso
legislators go
americano.
to the U.S. Congress. They talk with U.S. congresspersons.
E nós apenas queremos continuar trabalhando para que o Brasil seja
And we-
país soberano,
And all we want is to continue working so that Brazil will be a sovereign country,
que saiba utilizar
a country
o
that
potencial de
knows
desenvolvimento que o Brasil tem.
how to use its tremendous potential for development to benefit the people of
Eu
Brazil.
fico me perguntando todo dia,
I ask myself,
quem interessa tentar
every day,
destruir a Petrobras?
who would be interested in trying to
Interessa destruir
destroy
a indústria de
Petrobras?
engenharia brasileira?
Who would be interested in destroying Brazil's engineering
destruir
industry?
A maior empresa
Who would be
do
interested
mundo aqui no Brasil.
in destroying the largest company in protein in the world here in Brazil? Who is interested
Nós
in
temos
fracking in
alguns
Brazil?
países do mundo
Mr. President, Monday marks the 15th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. You oppose that invasion. Your thoughts today, with the U.S. continuing in its presence in both Iraq as well as in Afghanistan?
Amy, eu lamento profundamente porque no dia 10 de dezembro de 2002,
Amy, I am so sorry that on December 10th, 2002,
presidente Bush,
I spoke with President Bush at the White
dizia ao
House,
presidente Bush que o Iraque não tinha
and
armas
I
químicas porque
told
o
him
chefe da agência
that Iraq did not have chemical weapons because the head of the international agency was a Brazilian, Ambassador Bustami.
O presidente dos Estados Unidos,
The
mais o
President
primeiro-ministro da
of the United
Inglaterra,
States and the Prime Minister
contaram
of Great
uma
Britain
mentira ao mundo
told the
dizendo
world
que existiam
a lie,
armas químicas
saying that there were
Iraque.
chemical weapons in Iraq.
E o Saddam Hussein mentia ao mundo,
And Saddam Hussein was
fingindo que tinha.
lying to the world, pretending that he had
Seria mais
them.
fácil Saddam Hussein ter salvado o seu país da invasão americana.
When Saddam Hussein could have saved his country from the U.S. invasion by asking for international presence to inspect. So two lies.
A do governo americano dizendo que tinha armas
The lie by the U.S. government saying there's chemical weapons,
Saddam Hussein
and the lie by
fingindo
Saddam
que
Hussein
tinha,
pretending that
destruindo
he
o país
had them.
e não resolveu o problema
Well,
do terrorismo.
these have led to the destruction of a country without resolving the problem of terrorism in the world.
Eu acho que foi uma pena.
I think it was a great shame.
Pena. E
It was a shame,
fazem muitos anos e até agora
and
ninguém
so many
conseguiu
years have gone by, and to this day,
nada de
no
armas
one
químicas
has
no
been
Iraque.
able to show anything of chemical weapons in Iraq.
Me parece que a única arma química que tem no Iraque era o próprio Saddam Hussein.
It seems
Caro ele, e
to
o
me
terrorismo continua.
that the only chemical weapons were just him pretending that there were, and then terrorism goes on.
President Lula, what is your assessment of President Donald Trump?
Olha, eu não tenho avaliação. Eu acho muito.
I don't have an assessment.
Esquisito presidente da
I think it's very unusual that there's a president of the republic in the most powerful country of the world who governs the country by Twitter.
Eu acho muito interessante isso.
I find that very interesting.
Mas, de qualquer forma, eu tenho que respeitar porque ele foi eleito pelo povo
But in any event, I have to respect him because he was elected by the people of the United States. And if he was elected by the people of the United States, then he
exerce o mandato do jeito que ele quiser.
is going to serve his term as he wishes because the people of the United States gave him the authority to do so.
Então, eu não posso ficar julgando o jeito de governar do presidente Trump. É jeito dele.
Cannot be sitting in judgment of how Trump governs. He governs in his way, and we'll see how it goes.
Your thoughts on President Trump calling Africa, Haiti, and other countries, well, he called Africa a country, S-hole countries.
Olha, eu acho que uma pessoa que se comporta dessa maneira
I think that
relação a país irmão,
if a person behaves that way in discussing relations with sister countries, then I don't think a person would really be qualified to be president of the country, even if in the United States.
É preciso tratar os países mais pobres que ainda não tiveram chance de progredir, de crescer economicamente.
Countries that have no chance of growing economically must be treated with great respect.
Eu vou te dizer uma coisa.
Amy, let me tell you one thing.
Se os países ricos,
If the rich countries,
sobretudo os Estados Unidos,
especially the United
já
States,
gastaram mais de 14 trilhões de
who
dólares
have already spent more than $14 trillion
crise financeira de 2008 com a
to
queda
resolve
do Lehman
the
Brothers,
2008 financial crisis with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers,
tivesse utilizado parte desse dinheiro
instead of having
para
used part
ajudar os países
of that
da
money
África a se desenvolverem,
to help the countries of Africa to develop,
ia crescendo mais,
well, had they done so,
gerando
certainly
mais emprego,
Africa would be
fortalecendo a
growing more,
democracia
creating more
e
jobs,
melhorando a
strengthening
vida do
democracy, and improving the lives of the people.
Na primeira reunião que nós tivemos do G20 em Londres,
The first meeting we had of the
sugerimos
G20 in London, there we
países
suggested
ricos deveriam fazer investimentos
that
nos
the rich
países pobres
countries should make
para que a
investments in
gente
the poor countries
criasse novas regiões industrializadas no mundo
so as to
e
create
novos
new
consumidores no mundo.
industrialized regions in the world and new consumers in the world.
Lamentavelmente, os
Unfortunately,
países ricos viraram protecionistas outra vez
the rich countries are to turn to protectionism once
em
again
2008.
and took a long time to resolve the crisis of 2008.
I wanted to read for you from the Merco Press. It says, a controversial visit and meeting of two branches of government, the Brazilian government, was reported in the Brazilian media. In effect, last Saturday afternoon, President Michel Temer made a visit to the head of the Federal Supreme Tribunal, Carmen Lucia, at her residence, and was not conducted as part of the president's official schedule. I believe they were seen hugging. The visit took place 5 days after Supreme Tribunal Justice Luis Roberto Barroso allowed police to investigate Temer's financial records, the first time in the history of Brazilian Republic that an acting president has had his financial records opened by judicial order. You know, this was happening at about the same time that reports emerged that the U.S. Special Counsel, Robert Mueller, is looking into Trump family finances. But I wanted to ask you about this because it's this Supreme Court in Brazil that will also be determining your fate. Is that right, President Lula?
Olha, primeiro eu acho que o presidente Temer poderia se
Look,
encontrar
first,
com a
I
presidente
think
Carmen Lúcia
that President Temer can meet with the Justice, Carmen Lucia,
na Suprema Corte ou na sala dele no Palácio do Planalto.
either at her office at the Supreme Court or at his office in the presidency. But they apparently had a secret meeting.
Segundo, aqui no Brasil nós
Second.
precisamos restabelecer as funções das instituições.
Amy, here in Brazil, we need to reestablish the functions of the institutions. Here in Brazil,
aqui no Brasil a política está judicializada.
Politics is becoming channeled into the courts, and the courts are becoming politicized.
E é preciso que as instituições voltem à normalidade.
And each institution needs to go back to normalcy. The judiciary, through the Supreme Court,
Garante da Constituição.
is a guarantor of the
O Poder
Constitution.
Executivo executa
An
e o
executive
Poder
branch
Legislativo legisla.
executes, carries out, and the legislative branch legislates. If we were to once again have a harmonious and respectful relationship, then we can have Brazil go back to normalcy.
Também
I,
tem
too,
acontecido coisas muito anormais no Brasil.
well,
Tem muito juiz e ministro
Very
falando pela televisão.
abnormal things have happened. There are judges talking on television every day.
Há processo de desrespeito às instituições.
There's a process of disrespecting institutions in Brazil.
Parte do Poder Judiciário fazendo greve.
Part of the
requerendo
judiciary
auxílio moradia de quase
is
R$4.600.
on strike. They want a housing allowance of almost 4,600 reals. And these people
Essas pessoas ganham R$30 mil por mês, ou
earn
seja, portanto, não precisam
30,000 reals per month. So they don't need a housing allowance
brasileiro que não tem casa.
like the Brazilian population who have no home. Those people need housing assistance.
Então, eu tenho convicção, tenho certeza.
So I have the conviction, Amy, I am certain that it is possible to reestablish harmony in Brazil.
Tenho certeza que é possível
I'm
a gente
certain
voltar a ter clima
that it
sabe, que
is
tínhamos em
possible
2010, 2009,
to go
todo
back
mundo
to
vivendo
a climate like we had in 2010, 2009, with everyone living harmoniously, people talking among one another,
vivendo democraticamente
and
na
everybody
diversidade.
living democratically in diversity.
President Lula, you could be arrested at any point. What will you do?
Não, eu não posso ser detido a qualquer momento. Eu não posso ser detido a qualquer momento.
I cannot be arrested at any moment.
Ser detido a qualquer momento.
This thing about any moment
Desejo
is
dos meus adversários, dos meus inimigos.
a desire on the part of my adversaries and my enemies. I can only be arrested
Crime
if someone proves that I have committed a crime.
Eu tenho certeza, Amy,
I'm certain,
nesse
Amy,
momento que eu estou falando com você,
as I
eu
speak with you
estou mais
right now,
tranquilo do que os meus acusadores.
I have a perfect peace of mind as compared to those who are leveling accusations against me.
Dos inocentes.
I have the peace of mind of the innocent.
Tranquilidade dos inocentes.
You can rest assured that I have the peace of mind of those who are innocent, and those who are bringing accusations against me know that they're doing so on the basis of a lie, and therefore
Não acredito que eles
I don't
colocar a cabeça num
think that they are able to place their head on their pillow at night and sleep with the tranquility that I sleep with every day.
Even if you continue to say you're innocent, a court has ruled that you are guilty and face, nearly 10 years in jail. So even if you disagree with both the conviction and the appeal being denied, that has taken place. Would you resist arrest? Would you resist being jailed?
Não, eu trabalho com a hipótese de que
No,
haverá justiça.
I'm working based on the hypothesis that there will be justice before having to make such a decision. I'm convinced because
Ô, Amy, a única coisa que eu estou exigindo nesse momento,
the only
a
thing
única coisa que eu estou exigindo nesse momento
that I'm looking out for at this
eles
time
julguem o mérito do meu
is
processo.
for them to
A Suprema
judge
Corte
my trial on the
e o
merits.
Superior Tribunal de Justiça
The Supreme Court
não
and
podem deixar
the
prevalecer
appellate court
a
cannot
inverdade contra
let
a verdade.
stand an untruth against the truth.
Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, president of Brazil from 2003 to 2010. Brazil, the sixth most populous country in the world. Lula is now running again for president. He is the current frontrunner, unless the courts stop him. and send him to jail. Special thanks to Charlie Roberts. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.